Great. I think we're live.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm Jinko Goto. I produce animated features, and I'm so excited here this morning to present building an animation pipeline with Katana and RenderMan. So I'd like to introduce you, our panelists. Let's start with Tom Jacob. He is the managing director at DNEG. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Tom. I come from a producing background. I produced a couple of movies at DreamWorks. And then I also built, before that, I built studios in London and Vancouver to produce 2 independent movies. And that's really my love and desire. I really, want to help our team, help the directors make the absolute best movies they can make.
Thank you, Tom. Our next panelist is Taylor Moore, who was the first person hired by DNEG to work in feature animation. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Taylor.
Dating me, Jinko. Goodness gracious. Yes, so hi, I'm Taylor. I came from a traditional fine arts background, specializing in photography, then moved to digital photography. Originally from Vancouver, British Columbia, so there was a lot of film production going on, television production, so I started getting in on that. Moved to feature animation shortly thereafter because I just love the creativity that's involved in it. And moved out, I actually worked with Tom at DreamWorks for a couple of years, and then moved out to join him over in London at DNEG Animation. So yeah, it's been a blast.
Thank you, Taylor. And our next panelist is Paul Bosk. He's the global workflow architect for DNEG. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul. Good morning. Great to be here. I'm Paul. I work as a global workflow architect for DNEG Feature Animation. My background is in CG supervision for episodic and long-form work, and I had the pleasure to work with some great studios on the way to help them deliver feature films and episodic work. And I joined DNEG about 4 years ago and helping them deliver and build a pipeline and workflows for feature animation within the VFX establishment that was there. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Paul. And Aisha Medina, another wonderful lady here who heads animation and is a technical supervisor. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you, Jinko. Hi, everybody. I'm Aisha. I'm the animation technical supervisor for Features DNEG. Started at DNEG 16 years ago, quite a long time now. Started out as a junior animator, worked my way up to co-animation supervisor. Became VFX animation technical suit shortly after my son was born 4 years ago, and moved over to Features fairly recently. And my main role as technical supervisor is to try and help the animators spend as much of their day animating and being as creative as they can be, and as little of their day trying to navigate and get distracted by Python tools.
Thank you, Aisha. And our last panelist is Philippe Denis, a visual effects supervisor at DNEG. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm Philippe. Yes, I've been 28 years in the business, so talk about getting old. So I started as a generalist in Belgium. I was working on commercial, and then I wanted to work on feature animated movies. So I joined DreamWorks, and I spent 28 years there. I started as a lighter, then became lighting sup, and finally visual effects supervisor. I worked on Ants, I worked on a bunch of Shrek, and Megamind, Peabody, and my last show over there was Trolls. And there I joined DNEG, Tom, Taylor, and the rest of the team 4.5 years ago to really start the adventure of, demoing the feature animation division. Even though they were at it already for 2 years, it was great to start and experiment with, bringing something fully for the table and also learning from also the VFX side of things.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to switch it over to Tom. Tom, do you want to intro some work and share with the audience?
I'd love to. Thank you so much. Yeah. What we'd love to do is we'd super excited to play you the trailer of our first movie, the one that Philippe and Taylor and Aisha all worked on, which is great, which is the partnership we have with Locksmith Animation. Disney are distributing It's called Ron's Gone Wrong, and it's out in theaters on October the 22nd. So it is a theatrical release, which is so great at this time.
Imagine a device that is the fastest, most advanced, complex piece of technology in the world. But what if it wasn't just a device? What if it was your new best friend?
Hi!
Introducing the BeeBot. It connects you to the world like never before. Express yourself. Imagine without limits. Create, play, and enter a new world of friendship. The BeeBot. Let's make friends.
Wow.
Happy late birthday, Barney.
Oh, Dad, you got me one!
Hi, insert registered name. I am your...
My BeeBot. BeeBot. The BeeBot. There's something wrong with it. It's not meant to do that.
I'm not meant to do that. I am for making friends. Does Barney need friends?
Well, yeah. Or, fun fact, he will not survive middle school.
Where are you going?
Addis Ababa,
You're supposed to stay
Amsterdam,
within 6
Arizona.
feet of me.
6? I am insert registered name's best friend out of my box.
Ah!
Yeah, so that was super fun to work on, and really enjoyable. Great partnership with Locksmith. But then also, just to give you a flavor of what the other side of DNEG is, the VFX powerhouse, we've got a short reel of that to play as well. Great. So that is DNEG.
Well, thank you, Tom, for sharing the great work.
Yeah.
So let's get started with our panel today. So Tom, can you tell us a little bit about when and why did DNEG into the feature animation business?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, we started in 2014. Over the previous years, DNEG had been offered the opportunity of doing animated features, but as a one-off, and they'd seen from other VFX companies, tremendous amount of experience, a tremendous amount of work that was needed to do one, and then all those benefits got shelved after the show, and so what they really wanted to do and what we wanted to do and why I joined was we wanted to make sure that we were a sustained division. We wanted to make sure that we could utilize all the experiences we'd learned and that the crew had learned from one show, and then take that to the next. And we wanted to make sure that, like the VFX side of the business, we were working at the very highest level. We got in touch with Liz Murdoch's new startup company with Julie Lockhart and Sarah Smith, Locksmith Animation, and they had that same ambition. So we signed an agreement with them to make their first film, and that gave us the confidence to then go out and build a really experienced team, to get people from the big studios and people like, Taylor and Philippe from DreamWorks, but also other soups from DreamWorks, Sony, Pixar, Disney. And we also had time. We had time. Locksmith was still in development on their movie. So we had about 2 years, to really prep and understand, where were the holes, where were the big gaps between a feature animation pipeline and a visual effects pipeline. And that's where people like Taylor and Aisha and Philippe and Paul all came in to help identify those holes.
So let's talk about the difference between VFX and animation pipeline. Taylor, do you want to take that on?
Sure. So this wasn't the first studio that I had come to that was investing in a feature animation pipeline. This is I think the third studio that I had gone to that we were sort of making the switch. And the reality is that there's a lot of elements that you can piggyback off of. But the biggest difference that I've found between animation and visual effects or direct-to-video or television is the way that we handle assets, the number of assets, the volume of assets, the amount of animation, 87 minutes, every single frame is being animated. And the fact that we're doing, 2,500 shots, sequence-based lighting, shot groups of lighting. So what was really great about DNEG is that they do so many things so well in the visual effects. So there was a lot of things that we didn't really need to invest in up front, but two of the things that we really did need to invest in was sequence-based lighting, shot groups, and so that was a very big motivator for us to move to Katana and RenderMan, as opposed to the Clarice system that the visual effects division is using. It was just so much easier for us to be able to light an entire sequence and then be able to divvy that off into multiple shots. And then also the USD pipeline that Paul and Philippe have really been a huge part of pulling into the rest of the visual effects division as well. And so it's been a journey, as we all say, but the journey has absolutely been worth it. And there's been a lot that we have learned from the visual effects side. Philippe, do you want to speak a little bit about really coming in on BeeBot and taking what we had started and just turning that out for a beautiful feature?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you have a very good point here. I think, Taylor, she started before me, so she spent a lot of time explaining how we work in feature animation. And one of the other big difference besides asset is also, they work at the shot is really the base, when for us it's more the sequence, and that really informs also what we went with RenderMan and Katana in terms of the lighting. But a big part of it, we've also, we had to create variant for generics and so on. So it was spending quite a bit of time to explain how we work in feature animation, and keep an open mind, right? Because we all had, we had a lot of experience in animation. We had also some artists and supervisors were coming from the VFX, so they were already interacting with them directly. But to the different company we worked at, we also had variant on to treat the same problem. All of those problems have been approached in some ways. But they was really trying to explain that, okay, we work that way because of this and this, and doing graph, doing explanation, working the process. And what I thought was really interesting is that exchange actually, it's a two-way street, right? So there is things then we were able to pitch, and they were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. We could work like this. I'm thinking I spent quite a bit of time with Theo Fasse, we saw head of Creature. And he was like, oh, this is interesting, because we wanted to work with our generic and our variant in a more deterministic approach, when they were used to create like huge amount of, thousands, crowds of thousands. And we work with like 30 and 40 and 50. So spending this time, he could understand something, but there is also a lot of things we benefit from. One of the big examples I always think is we build our CD for non-search, the name of the CD where the Ron's Gone Wrong is working. And we work with a procedural approach. And I work on Megamind, and it took about a year and a half for us at DreamWorks to actually generate the CD. It was great. It worked amazingly well, but it was really working that out from the ground up. In like 3 and 4 days at DNEG, we were able to get something. Now, we were not done. There was still a lot of work to be done, but that's where you benefit from the quality of what DNEG and the savoir-faire, as we say in French, of a company. One of the biggest area as well was compositing, because they have huge amount of compositing. And in animation, at least for us, the lighters do the compositing, and we kept that model. But we were also able to bring some supervisor who would help us and join the team and set up, a new script and so on, giving process and teaching the artists to get better, so we can make better choice in terms of what we do in lighting and rendering versus compositing. So that journey was really, and actually, personally, that's where I came. I came at DNEG because I wanted to hopefully bring something to the table because of my 20 years of experience at DreamWorks, but also discover another way to work and having that exchange. And I think that was really that really opened my eyes, and I learned throughout this process.
Great. So Paul, can we talk a little bit about the experience of building a pipeline and how you were able to leverage DNEG's technology and their experiences in VFX?
Right. Sure. I think one of the amazing things that happened joining DNEG was to join a company with so much experience, and a company that has been around for 20 years, has delivered some of the biggest movies in history, and to walk in there and build a new pipeline within an existing structure that clearly has a proven track record of doing something amazing. And the challenge the exciting thing about this was there was a lot of work there that was phenomenal, like the ability to deal with scale, with the multi-side of things, with kind of the under the hood things that are not often very credited about infrastructure and technology of just handling the amount of texture I/O at the end. When it comes to final rendering, the challenges that come with rendering on the cloud and all of those things, DNEG had just a really amazing amount of homework done there. And then also the artistry, the talent around NFGen, the talent around effects, the talent around compositing, the workflows and tools there. But where a lot of the challenges came from in the end was to look at that and say, okay, this is all great, but we have to make a feature film now. So what are actually the problems that we're trying to solve? Because there are a lot of solutions there, but those solutions might not be necessarily the right solutions for what we have to solve. And then on the other side, we had all these people, everyone from the team coming from all these amazing companies, and at DreamWorks we did this, and at Sony we did that, and at Pixar we did this, and so we gathered all these solutions, and a big task was at that point to step back and say, okay, how do we now solve the problems in our context? Like, I'll put this on a post-it above my screen at some point to say, love the problem, don't love the solution, love the problem, look at the problem, and make it a challenge. And to Taylor's point, one of the things, a few of those key things that came out of this were assets and variants. Like, how do we deal with variation? Like a big building everything on screen, how do we deal with the complexity of variation? How do we deal with multi-shot workflows? And how do we deal with the non-photoreal side of things? And when it comes to variation, so it's not everything that they dealt with, and I'll lead to Aisha in a second about animation. But when it comes to assets and variants, one of the things was that there was a great system in-house at DNEG already, very established for shot work, but we didn't really find that ability to edit variants throughout the shot history, track asset variants properly. And that's when we started looking around, and it was 4 years ago. So USD was there. It wasn't quite at the state it's today, but that was a moment when we said that is great. This is what we want to do, and we started adopting USD. And it was a bit difficult in the beginning. And I think one of the key things, or one of the key takeaways for me there was that the ability to show what it adds to the team. And, people need to experience innovation. Artists want to see what it adds. So one of the first things we did is to actually package up some VFX assets in USD and show them how a helicopter can be destroyed in a sequence, to put that into the context, to take the feature animation request into the context of what was familiar to the team, to show how it could be done, what value it might do. And at that point, things started rolling. The moment we did a proof of concept with that bullet holes in a helicopter, I think some switches flipped, and it's like, okay, great. And so we moved our asset pipeline in USD and built a hybrid pipeline with this existing work to merge the two together. So our asset pipeline was USD, and then the shot data would be layered on top in the existing DNEG system. That was fantastic and a real amazing learning journey. But then the second one was multi-shot workflow. And we had at the time, luckily, a lighting supervisor who just finished an MBA and was really good in spreadsheets and presentations and business cases. And he did a full cost benefit analysis of 3 cases: easy shot, medium shot, a complicated shot. And we tested them both. We looked at, okay, we have the existing pipeline. How do we do each of those cases? We have a new prototype pipeline in Katana. And we looked at that and compared the two really down to development cost. How long would it take? How would we deal with iteration? How will we deal with the amount of artists required at peak times? And we made a point that a Katana RenderMan combination would get us much further than what was existing in place. Not that it couldn't be done, of course, but I think in the end, the problem we knew we had to deal with 1,700 shots. We knew what a feature timeline would be like. And again, approaching it from the angle of the problem and then showcasing this, we made a point to switch. And the third one was the switching to RenderMan. I think DNEG had a long history with RenderMan previously. It's been always a great relationship. And looking at non-photoreal requirements, something that traditionally is not something very strong and was very strong in the photoreal world of DNEG, to nudge more into the non-photoreal rendering. That's where we also landed on RenderMan and moved that forward and started integrating that. And we had some brilliant people I think at this point it's a big shout out to the pipeline teams and the Katana team and the render team. They did something phenomenal to put in USD, to put in Katana, to put in RenderMan, from the training side of things, the integration, how we're dealing with the database, all these unsung things in the back. And you guys really pulled it off, and that was a fantastic journey we did over 2.5 years to really move from, I think it was a Brussels sprout with a wilted leaves. That was like the first asset in USD we published, and to in the end having fully procedural cities authored in Solaris and USD, rendered in Katana and RenderMan. And then all the custom plugins we wrote for Katana and USD, from dealing with VDBs, dealing with Alembics. A custom material system that is now very familiar in Katana 4. So everyone using Katana 4 sees something that was very much also inspired and then collaborated with our team's work. So it was really fantastic to be on that journey. But yeah, another big one was also animation. We can go into more questions about details of Katana and RenderMan in a second. I think Aisha, do you want to talk about animation?
Yeah. So Aisha, let's talk about animation, because again, this is another big problem solving for you, I'm sure. And how do you, developing tools, but also, changing the mindset of the crew of how they work?
Yeah, for me, because I came from the VFX side of things, I'd spent many years at DNEG trying to convince ProdTech that the tools that animators need in VFX are actually the same tools that are needed by featured animators. But of course, in VFX, when you've got a crew of 20 animators working on maybe 20, 30 shots, a couple of sequences, the production technology priority of those tools is, it's not as important or as crucial as when you get to features animation, and then you've got 200 animators who are working on 2,000 shots. So those tools in VFX, we had a raft of tools and the animators were fairly well served, but they were all kind of version 1 of a tool. We had a character picker and a pose library. but the UX of those tools wasn't particularly tailored to the animation experience. And we had to have conversations with ProdTech about, well, if we make these tools nicer to use, animators are very visual creatures, so if we make them nicer to look at and encourage the animators to use them in a way where they can interact with them more freely, then yes, it's an investment from production technology to get some developers on those tools and spend some time up front. And there were conversations we had with DNEG, VFX ProdTech, along the lines of, this will help, you know, this will make, say an animator interacts with Maya 100 times. This particular tool, like a picker, for example, could shave a few seconds off each of those interactions. So animators can get quicker at their job. And they also have less time worrying about the tools or how to interact with the tools and more time just concentrating on their performance. And once we kind of had that conversation with the visual effects production technology, we realized that the difference between animation tools for VFX animators and for feature animators, the only difference is priority in where it gets developed. So where you could do without a picker, character picker on a VFX show, you really can't do without one on a feature show. So those conversations were had in the early days, and eventually, like Paul said, there was a light bulb moment where it's like, oh, okay, these tools, although they seem like luxury tools in VFX sphere, in the feature sphere, they're not luxury, they're actually quite important. And I think the whole idea of plussing the animator's experience, trying to make their day a little easier so they can concentrate on the creative bit, I think that was definitely a conversation worth having with VFX guys and girls. And now we're in a place where, of course, we have this lovely raft of tools. We're lucky enough to have some very talented developers help us from the VFX side, you know, as well as the features TDs. And we have this lovely raft of tools now. And the good thing about that is now the VFX animators can benefit from those tools as well. And they are starting to use them as well. And they get the same cost ratio. You know, I can get my shot done that little bit faster. So that's kind of where the whole tool side of it needs to just kind of be shifted slightly to more animator focus than they were in the VFX world.
Thank you, Aisha. So let's talk about, you know, our industry is global now and very competitive. So in order to compete today, what are some ways that you're dealing to work in creative ways? I want to just turn that question over to everybody on the panel and see what thoughts you guys have.
Well, I mean, I'll start just because we're going to talk about creative. I think we can all join, but I think, you know, no matter what, as we went to this journey, and I want to add to, you know, Taylor and Paul's point that we were bringing that up, we were also making a movie. So we were creating images as we were developing our tools. So that you know, we always do that production, but then we're really starting from not ground zero because we were benefiting from the VFX side of things, but there was really clearly a lot of things to do as we were making the production. So that's one thing. But no matter what we create and the pipeline and the process and the technology, what we do is we're making images. We create animation, we're making images. And so our focus throughout this journey was really to, you know, being able to produce art that was supporting the movie. And also that means really working closely with our client, which was Locksmith. Now we have, you know, several projects, and we're keeping that philosophy with us. I think it's something that it's very close to all of us. I think that's what we like to do. But what was particular, I think, on What's Gone Wrong, that was also the first project for Locksmith. So the stakes they're always high, but I think, you know, they were also going to the journey to create the first project. So it was for us, all the work we've done, all the technology, all the process we put in place, and we were all involved very closely early in the project in terms of the design phase. I mean, Taylor came at the place, head of modeling came. I was there like 50% of my time for the first year. But it's really to work very, very closely with our clients, and not only create image, not create art. It's also provide process and work with them in terms of the schedule and so on. So I think that's something that we've done on this project, but we keep doing. I see that I'm on another project already, and I see that my project and Taylor is on another one, so I can speak about it a little bit. And I think that's really our philosophy. So you muted yourself.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'll just jump in there and just say one of the things that's come up a lot. It came up from Aisha. It came up from Philippe, Paul, certainly Taylor. Was what the level of intellectual investment that was needed in animation tools, the level of intellectual investment that was needed in Katana RenderMan, and this was why it was so critical, right from the very start. If we were going to start in the right way and produce films at the right quality level, we needed to start right from the beginning, to go in with the confidence that we were going to be making multiple movies, because if you haven't got that confidence, then everybody's a little bit like, well, should we wait and see whether you get another movie and then we'll give you some better tools? And it was like, no, it's fine. We're going to make multiple movies. This is a long-term, 7 to 10 year minimum time. And of course, it's going to end up much longer than that. But we knew that we were going to do that, and so that intellectual investment was able to propagate right from the beginning.
Yeah, I think in terms of competitiveness, I mean, I don't know with compete in terms of that, but I think one of the things we really try is to answer the biggest question as early as possible, and again, in terms of developing a pipeline, what we wanted to do is trying to answer questions on the biggest context possible. Yep. So, I mean, Taylor can speak a little bit on surfacing, but what we were trying to do, and it took a while because we didn't have the tool. And nothing was fully developed at the time. But as soon as we could, Taylor started to show her work in the context. So instead of looking at asset by asset, she was looking at showing the full set with all the assets in there. Ladin was jumping early on this, even before we had art keys, just to get, and so that really helped. That helped us making better decisions as supervisor and as artists. But the client, the production designer, also is able to judge the work in the full context. So it's true with this. It's true with the crowd. It's true. We're trying to answer the broader question as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And there we can talk, and Taylor should take that, but in terms of, because you've done more work on that, but like trying to develop more real time as much as possible in the process.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started up at DNEG, the texture department, the looked-at department, the grooming department were 3 separate divisions, and for the most part still are through the visual effects side and for television. So I wanted to bring those all together, and so that's how feature animation runs. It's a unified division because I really believe in textuality. I really believe that you get the best results doing an amazing job as quickly as possible, and then like sorting out the little bits and pieces at the end. But you sort of really need to know what's happening, and you need to be able to interact with all the other departments as quickly as possible to answer some of those key questions. And that mentality has sort of been broadened to real-time renderers, and it's been an amazing journey to work on projects. I just recently did a project with Home before we were using Unreal Engine, but we are doing other real-time render projects as well. And just the multi-user workflow, being able to have modeling and surfacing and animation and lighting and layout all in a scene together has been a game changer for the director, for the story writer, for all of these things, to be able to really see what's happening in their movie before they saw final renders. So they were able to adjust, how the character behaved, how many, scenes we really needed to get the story across, and then being able to adjust the color script on the fly to really understand that in this sequence, the animation is dictated as such, and so thus we want to change the coloration of this sequence to better reflect what's happening out of animation. So the more that you can generate as a team unified, the more you can change story. And ultimately, I think that, and Tom, I think you would agree, that's really what this is about. We are storytellers. We work with story. It is about creating that visual image that tells the story that we saw on paper, which is usually just, that to me is one of the greatest achievements in feature animation.
Yep.
So to that point, let's talk about, you guys are like based in London, you have a facility in Montreal, you have a facility in Mumbai. I mean, you're truly a global entity. So how do you do that? How do you juggle all of that? And what are your relationship with clients like and production partners when you have these multiple sites? So I'd love to hear some things about that.
Yeah, it's it wasn't something we originally set out right from the beginning to do. We wanted to make sure that we started in London. We started, understanding how we at DNEG would make an animated movie. But once we'd got through that initial big hump, about halfway through Ron's Gone Wrong, we began to push work, to our Montreal studio and to our Mumbai studio. And, it's come along, technology has come along a long way, and, syncing and all those kind of technology things are really, are much more straightforward. I mean, as we can all see now, we're all remote, we're all working just fine remotely, and ultimately, although it was a bigger challenge 5 years ago, it's not such a challenge now. It's now more of a challenge, making sure that everybody is constantly up to speed where we are on a project. But we use all the right tools and all the right tracking software to be able to make sure that happens. Paul, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think it's also, maybe I can go a bit into the John Doe's question about like what was some of the challenging parts of using Katana and PM and rendering pipeline. Yeah. I think one thing we needed to do is to really look into how do we QC and how do we pass data on. I mean, no one really likes that part of work, but I think when you work cross-site, it's really important to actually find out at what point do we stop and say this is it. And this is where with USD we worked out this concept of the single assets, the components and the assemblies, and say, okay, for an environment we're checking here, for assemblies we're checking there, introducing shot-based QC renders and a final render that all could be triggered by artists, so anyone at any site could quickly assemble their shot, see what was there, compare the assets that were broken to the approved versions in the asset management system. And there was a lot of work. I think this was really a big challenge initially to introduce that process, where we ended up with something, I think like 2,000 unique assets on the show, and I think including variants. And we had, once we deal with 400, 500 character variants in total. It's really key that they get checked, and Taylor's team did an amazing job. I think we had only once was an asset release that broke a render overnight, like in a critical way, but otherwise it was so tightly QC'd that we could ship stuff across the globe, and it was always clear that, okay, version 70 was working, and basically releasing it in that way. And so that was a big one to talk about, to deal with complexity, new languages, new concepts. And similarly with Katana and RenderMan, there was a lot of training to do, a lot of ways of working, and the team didn't work before in that configuration. Maybe some people did, like some people knew each other from before, but for most parts we were all fresh together, all experienced, so with our own experience, but never together. And I think building a culture where we together say, okay, this is what we're fixing, and everyone, let's figure this out, share this communication and share these things. That was, I think, a major task forward. And then we had things like in Katana, to Joe's question, I think in Katana, like our Katana developers built a custom material system. It's very similar to what we see now in Katana 4. We had so much work done around USD, integrating USD in Katana. When we started, it was three years ago. Most the nodes that were available were the vanilla Pixar nodes. There was also not that much communication out there yet of how to even structure a USD scene graph in different contexts. So we figured that out for us, and then deploy this and release this in the different tools. Test the artists who are already stressed for working together for the first time with a very challenging creative brief, but keeping that in lockstep to move things forward and show the benefits, fixing a problem and iterating quickly, keeping an agile mindset to add value every step on the way. And even though it's not quite right, I think keeping that culture of saying, okay, we're improving the next thing, we're improving the next thing, we're improving the next thing. And with a goal in mind that we want to be a USD native studio to manage our scene graphs. And even though we're not doing all the shiny bells and whistles yet, the thing when it's always looking at the videos and like, oh, it would be so cool to do everything preview shaded here. I think there's a lot of work to do, but that doesn't mean you can't start adding value already with fractions of that. And I think identifying this of how do you start, how do you add value, and then follow that path on the big picture to eventually get to the big dreamy pipeline that we want to be in.
So here's a fun question to share especially with the younger audience, is that what do we know today that we didn't know 25 years ago or even 5 years ago?
Well, Philippe, you talked about your longevity in the business. I think you should take that.
Yeah, well, well, yes. So 28 years ago, I felt like every problem was like, how are we going to do it? Our energy was really going like, how are we going to approach this problem? I remember when we started doing fur. I mean, there was a big deal. The first long feature movie that I worked was Ants, and we didn't have fur, very, very little. And then the second one was Shrek, and we had a little bit of fur. So, that's all those problems, there was water and so on. I think now we're at the point of we can do everything. Once you've done a human being, I think that's the target. Now it's more like, I think it's how efficient we are at doing things and how we're going to the point as fast as possible so we can actually resolve the artistical solution, right? So what you want as a filmmaker, I mean, if you're a director, you want to get, it's like, okay, where do you validate your design, right? Because you start with sketch, you do models and so on, but what is going to be on the screen and what is the path which gets you there? And again, it's not one cut, it's like the full context of your movie, and in animation we create everything. So I think that's the journey we're at now, and all the pipelines when I was talking about full context, as much as context as possible, is oriented to that. And so if you can do it real time, it's even better, because there you can actually move your light, change your texture, and you get your animation moving, changing the pose, and you can interact with all your creative and your director. So we can all be on the same set and do things together. So I think that's where we're moving. What I find interesting, and it's the fact that we still have a visual challenge you know, now we've done, you know, when I started, it was very hard to make photoreal images. Where like, I remember as a lighter, I was like trying to make it as photoreal as well. We were far away from it. And then bond sliding came in, and ray tracing and path tracing. So naturally you go there, and now you're starting to see in animation, and we're moving away from it, right? Because, well, now there is another avenue to actually shape and find other images. So I found that very, very interesting. So that's image is one thing, but there is so many other things like this. So I think the fact that we can interact with the matter we're working with, like you can put your hand in and shape it, I think that's what's exciting for us today.
Aisha, do you have any thoughts for animation? Because I think as we evolve this industry where we can work in real time, I would hope that, you know, animators who are really like actors, right, behind a computer, that they could be part of the process as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot from the animators who worked on the real-time project, that it was lovely to be able to do their animation and then almost immediately put it into the Unreal and see it in a lit environment, in part of the environment. And that's something that on a traditional show or on One's Gone Wrong, you had to wait a bit, you know, before you could see that all put together, like Paul was describing. And there was a certain joy in being able to see that straight up. I think a lot of the animators are still very used to animating in Maya and will probably continue to do so for a while yet. But on the QC side and on the making sure the performance sits in the environment and is lit nicely, yeah, there are loads of benefits there. And I think one of the things that Philippe was saying was quite interesting, that there was a long drive for a very long time to make things look real, you know, how this character needs to look and move like a real person. And certainly in the last 5 years, like with films like Into the Spider-Verse, that sort of thing, there's been a shift back to more stylistic animation, where it's more about the expression and the performance. And I think that's really lovely. You know, the technology's come so far and the skill in animation has come so far. It's like, you can make that look real. That's, you know, that's good. We can do that. But how do we move forward from that? How do we make this stuff an experience? And I think that's from what the projects that I can see coming up now, there's a lot of that going on. And I think it's great just to have a really rich visual kind of tapestry and library of the way things look and move. So yeah, that's the difference I've seen over the last kind of 5 years.
Yeah, I think to add to this, one observation for me is that a lot of technology is getting very commoditized. I think the fact, and if you look back 10 years ago, you had to be in some of the biggest studios to get access to RenderMan. You wouldn't probably have something close to USD in a small studio, or you might have your own interpretation of that. And now you can download a lot of that stuff, and a lot of tools ship with it. So a lot of the tech that the big studios use is starting to become more and more available. And the trend is continuing, looking at some of the real-time work. So where things really, what it's really about now is, I think, is how do you glue that together? How do you make sense of that tech for artists? How do you use that tech to actually advance what you as a business or you as an artist or you as a creative want to do, and not just follow the next shiny thing? I think there's so much amazing work out there that is probably used in 1% of the cases, and actually identifying though, okay, what of this tool is useful for what. So because at the end of the day, we're making images, we're producing pretty pictures, we want to do that collaboratively, we want to do iteratively, we want to do that in context, and looking at what solutions are out there, how do we wire them together to get this done, and then focus on that, deliver results, do something, like start, fix a first issue, show it to the artists, work with the artist further, and make a difference. And
great. So we have a few minutes left. So we're just fielding some questions from the audience. So Paul, what were the biggest challenges of moving to USD?
I was just responding to this, but I can say it.
Yeah.
At the time, so we started this more than 3 years ago. the industry support or the available plugins in the tools like Maya and Katana were much less advanced than now. So there was a big task and a huge achievement from our engineering team to translate this, write custom plugins, translate some of the USD data into Katana and Maya and work on that. The other big challenge was of how do you, this is one of the amazing things about USD, you can do so much with it. And how do you actually use it, and what parts of it do you use? Because you might have all these composition arcs, for example, but that doesn't mean you want to maybe use all of them in round one. Maybe in round one you want to look at how you're doing things today, and start somewhere simple, and kind of that journey exploring this, like what is actually useful and what do we actually need today. Because this is then where it gets exciting, is by starting like that, we figured out, we started quite simple. We really looked into variants and layers in the beginning. And then at some point you go like, oh, and now for this edge case, we want to do this. And for that edge case, you do this. And then you start to realize why it's so good and why that Pixar spent years figuring this out. And that these issues that come inevitably in any animation journey have been fixed before, have been thought about in an abstract way. But I wouldn't start the other way around. Just because you can do some crazy inherits for whatever you want, I would say start with the simple side of things, and the complex stuff comes automatically. And that was a big challenge to get in that direction, and start focus it on the beginning and start to pick people up where they are. And then I think there's a lot of infrastructure to take into consideration. Like we worked a lot with the database and the infrastructure team to make sure that the loads on the database worked, that asset resolution worked, that we could track approval statuses through the asset resolver and get these things done. I think that's the beginning. And then a lot of it comes for free. I think that's kind of part of the nice stuff. Once you have an asset published, opening it in USD view is nice. It's when you have it actually in a database system and you can click spacebar and it pops up. You don't have to write your own viewer. So a lot of things are coming and the industry is now moving. So suddenly new features pop up everywhere, which is amazing. But the foundation is key. There's still, I think, a lot of work still to be done to come up with like cookbooks for various size studios and various workflows to guide how development or how structure can be done for different needs.
So, Paul, there's another question for you. How does asset version control, especially in a global studio like DNEG, impact the USD pipeline and the render queue system? What is the process required to approve a shot to go through the final compositing rendering?
Right. So we settled on. We started, so I think the first thing to say, we started and we had big plans where we again started quite simple to boil it down. And we started with the concept that components and like a prop or a set dressing element and the groups, the compound assets like assemblies, like characters, like environments, they were the approval checkpoints. So we didn't approve below that, like we wouldn't approve an individual geometry item, we would approve the whole thing together. So artists could contribute, things would be live, and then at some point you snapshot it, and that's your thing. We would do a quick automatic QC render, and that would be then also passed to other sites. At that point, it would be the render would consume that. So we did not do any live resolution in at render time. And because we were not fully in USD, because we used a hybrid pipeline, the Katana team also built a custom caching mechanism in Katana, so that as version resolution happened, because we did still use some version resolution to say, give me latest approved, give me latest non-declined or whatever, that at submission time or at build time, an artist could snapshot that to basically a big snapshot of all the versions, that how they were resolved, and stamp this onto your Katana scene as a cache so that the scene would stay consistent even if artists would work on the different elements. That then could be updated, could be flagged as out of date. Sometimes you wanted to keep it as it was, and then pass that down to the render farm.
Thanks, Paul. So we have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask this to Tom. So what are the biggest challenges when it comes to having a global studio in terms of recruiting talent?
Well, I think that part of the reason for having a global studio is to ease the talent issue. So what we know is that there are amazingly talented artists all over the globe, and so being able to have our studios, London, Montreal, Mumbai, and now Vancouver, really helps that, and it helps bring people, bring those talents into our team from different places. Now, obviously, we've during the pandemic, people are now very comfortable working remotely, and we've got studios opening multiple places in India, as well as another site in Canada coming up, and that really is incredibly helpful to bringing on the team. I mean, we're over 500 in feature animation now. We're going to be 750 by first quarter of next year. So it is a big operation now, and the talent is a critical part of that, because without that talent we don't make great movies at all. So that's first and foremost in our plans. What we hope is that the movies that we make and the talent we have here make great movies, attract great next movies, and those movies are what people want to work on. And that's what I think that we're into that groove now. We've got other movies in production right now that we can't talk about, and but they are all pretty special, and that's what is going to attract artists is good projects. It's really good projects, good filmmakers. That's really the simple part. The tools that we make and the pipeline that we build is a fantastically important part of that. But the projects is what great artists come for.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. And I want to just thank all the panelists, and also want to thank our host Pixar and RenderMan for hosting us. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Jinko. Thank you so much. Very, very kind of you. Fantastic. Thank you. Pleasure.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.